A big, scary orc, a thin, nimble elf wielding his bow, a long ears, arrows. That's an elf. And this is a hero. That is fantasy. None of this sentimental romance, scary horror, self-arrogant sci-fi. This is about the hero's quest. A cliché heroic man saving the world from a scary dark lord. And the women, well, they're there to be saved. Or at least that's how the fantasy genre was perceived for a long time. It was a very two-dimensional view, yes, but there was some truth to it. The fantasy genre originally took inspiration from a lot of old folk tales, which were molded through oral tradition, which practically limited it to at least some degree of simplicity. It was a very traditional genre, and probably the first genre to have ever been created. And a lot of it focused on the duality between good and evil, and often tended to focus on a morally righteous hero. But especially in the 90s, this began to change, with a lot of focus on these new concepts, internal struggle and character, as opposed to a more black and white alternative. And multiple different books and series, like The Wheel of Time for example, all played a role in the slow revolution into modern fantasy. But this change from the more good versus evil centered fantasy is most obvious seen in Grimdark, popularized by, you probably guessed it from the title, A Song of Ice and Fire. By the way, welcome back to another video. I know it's been quite a while, but I am back now. I've been a bit lazy, I've been a bit distracted, but I am back now with a great video that I know you will enjoy, so you might as well just go ahead and subscribe right now and not click away from the video. Just finish it, subscribe now, finish it, and be happy and blessed by my presence. No one could have foreseen that this man would implement so much vulgarity and violence into this wholesome genre. But where's the hero's quest, I hear some say? Good versus evil, the morally divine actions made and written to inspire us common folk readers. Nobody should take away my moral goodness. How dare they said. And all this was almost poetically symbolized by Ned Stark's Shashum. But was this even a good direction for the genre? There are a lot of people that like dualities, that like a story that takes inspiration from old folk tales instead of modern ails of the mind. And to be honest, there is a beauty in that. The Lord of the Rings is a great example of that, taken by many as a testament that honors nature's beauty. And that's a topic that's continually very relevant today. And in many ways, The Lord of the Rings stands in opposition to the progress consumerist mindset that we have today. But maybe it was also good that we moved on. The older style of writing doesn't have to be inferior for us to explore something new. Instead of following a hero with ideal morals, A Song of Ice and Fire was one of the first stories to explore the darker side of people, allowing the story to have no heroes at all, but just a bunch of people who all want conflicting things. And obviously it's grimdark, and amongst the shades of grey there's a lot of dark, but you can't say that's not just an extension of what that sort of society does to you. You don't have to look any further than the European Middle Ages to find probably some of the worst humanity has ever been. And this is getting a little bit messy, but my point is, A Song of Ice and Fire changed the genre. Back in 1996, when A Game of Thrones was published, it sent ripples throughout the literary community. And while it wasn't immediately a bestseller, it was very well received, and the series only continued to grow from there until in 2005, when A Feast for Crows was published. It was a #1 New York Times bestseller. And familiar authors like Brandon Sanderson even attested to how sought after Grimdark was after A Song of Ice and Fire. He was told on multiple occasions that writing Grimdark would increase his chances of getting published, and he even attempted it at one point before deciding that that wasn't his thing. But it goes to show just how huge an impact it had on the genre, like how Twilight spawned a bunch of vampire YA novels, and The Hunger Games spawned a whole bunch of dystopian novels, like the absolute literary art that is The Maze Runner and Divergent. But listen here, because it did more than just spawn copycats, because although it had a huge effect and practically birthed an entire subgenre on its own, which is insane, it also had a huge impact on the fantasy genre as a whole. It showed there was desire for more than just a hero's quest. and that there was an immense market out there for more grounded, character-driven fantasy stories. And even if new fantasy stories weren't grimdark, they still became far more character-driven and morally ambiguous. And in fact, I think it's time we take the next step. For a long time, a lot of fantasy, not all, okay, don't come after me, have functioned kind of like superhero stories. A lot of main characters in fantasy possess extraordinary abilities completely analogous to superpowers. And often these stories' main source of tension and stakes come from world-ending threats or dark lords, which are basically supervillains. And even in more modern fantasy, we still kind of see this trend. A lot of huge stories and series like the Wheel of Time or the Stormlight Archive, although filled with well-written characters, essentially function this way. But I think it's time to bury that notion. Fantasy doesn't have to be superhero stories. Not all, I know, but almost the majority, you must admit. At least 50% have stakes in the vein of, we have to save these people or prevent this bad thing, and we have to beat some villains up to do it. Maybe this is why there's some snobs out there. I mean, we've seen it with superhero stories and comic books. Maybe they look down on us because they think fantasy is just superhero stories. But ooh, they underestimate us. They fail to grasp the vast immensity of what fantasy is. Just how much can be achieved with a great fantasy story. Don't listen to them. Fantasy is the best. Even the hero's quest. Hell yeah. But these were just my ramblings. Lonely me, with 50 or so views probably, speaking into the ether of nothingness. But the few of you chosen to watch this video, you have now been granted a new, I don't know. Check out my Discord and subscribe.